Okay, we're picking up where the last video left off, so we're doing part 2 of the JDBC drivers for chapter 32. We left off at the bottom of page 1190, and we just went through the process of adding the MySQL connector. Now, if you're working with a different database, you could go ahead and download some of these other drivers. I believe that this is still the most current version of the JDBC driver. I could be wrong, but you'd want to check if you want to work with Oracle. But our concern here is working with MySQL, and um, just one really important thing here is that if you are going to go ahead and drop in, uh, you know, this stuff so that you can use it from a command line. Because some people still like to work in a text editor and then go to the command line to compile and run the program, which is fine. You can do that. But if you're going to do that, you got to make sure that you set your class path to the correct folder. So what I would do in my case, and since we're only really concerned with the first line here, we're not doing the Oracle version, what you might want to do is actually um, copy this but make a tweak to the path. So wherever you happened to store that, and I stored mine here, so you can see on MySQL, well, that's my zip file. Here's my folder. Mine's right in that spot. If I were to grab the path, I would grab this and then append to the end of it. And maybe I should just go ahead and just copy this. So now that I'm highlighted, and if you're wondering how I got there, if you click on your address bar, you can invoke the same path, but you don't want to click on any of these. You want to just click on an open space. It brings up the path as text already highlighted, so you can just hit Control C. And as basically a little bit of a buffer, since I need to kind of like change the command that exists in the book, I'm actually going to start here. I'm going to copy from this particular spot. And then I'm going to create a new file in my text editor and just drop that in. Now I'm going to go back to that file folder, click here to get the path, Control C to copy, back over to Notepad++ to paste. And really what I'm going to be replacing is this part here. And actually, because the name of the jar file is now different, I'm actually going to highlight the whole thing just to replace it. I'm just going to do a paste. And now these are folder names, so I still need to go back and add the name of the file. The file name is slightly different than the folder name, so just to make sure I'm getting it right, I'm just going to do a rename. So right click, rename, and then make sure it's all highlighted. Control C to copy, escape to not be in edit mode, back over to the text editor, throw in a backslash and paste. And then I'm going to save that. And what this is going to allow me to do, and you can see I already have a file named the way I want, is if I am going to work from the command line, I already have this path saved, so I can invoke it anytime I want to use it. So saving that file, and yes, I want to replace it. And now since I still have that in memory, I'm now going to go to my command prompt, and I would very simply paste that in. And actually, we don't want that part. We want this whole command. And press enter, and then that gets saved into the path for Windows, so that when you are working from a command line to compile and execute, having this in the path is a necessary first step. So you would actually go in, open up that file, copy it, paste it to the command line, execute it, and then you're ready to compile from there if that's what you choose to do. Now, most of us are not working that way. Most of us are working inside of Eclipse. So if you're working inside of Eclipse, there's a slightly different approach to doing this. And it is going to be project dependent. So in other words, you'll pull in the MySQL jar file as you need it. So for example, if I have any particular project here, and I have one up on the screen. It doesn't really matter at this point which one it is because it's for demonstration. And if I want to add the jar file, this is the process that you're going to use. So you're going to come in here, you're going to hit Project, Properties, you're going to go to Build Path, and then make sure you've got libraries selected. And I see that it's already added to this particular file, so let's try a different project. So I'm going to add it to this other project just to repeat the steps. Project menu, properties, build path, libraries, and then we're going to add an external jar file. And the reason it's external is because it's outside the project folder, but by taking this step, it's going to become part of that project. So now you're going to navigate to the location where your jar file is, and there it is. Go ahead and click Open, and now you can see that it's been added as a library. And I'm going to click Apply. And that's not necessarily a required step, but whenever I see an Apply button, my habit is click Apply before I click OK, just so I make sure that it sticks. Now I'm going to say OK, and now that library will be available to us to do our work. Now that is seemingly a cumbersome process, and really, you know, depending on what authoring environment you're using and what libraries were available when you installed Eclipse or NetBeans, there's a good chance that the MySQL driver is already present within the system libraries for the language, and it might just work, but you really cannot make that assumption. So it's really a safer bet to pull in the library just the way I did. And then it kind of gets bundled in with your project. And generally speaking, it's a better way to approach things. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense, and we'll get you ready to move on to that next step. So I'm going to pause the video here for a moment, and I'm back. And now what we're going to do is we're going to jump back over to our textbook, and we're going to walk through the rest of those steps. And now I'm not actually going to be typing these in. We'll do this in the example problem that follows in a page or so. But I do want to talk about this so that you get a firm grasp. So now that we have that stuff put in, now we are able to establish the connection. Now notice that there are actually classes that exist now that we can invoke. So the first thing we're going to do is establish a connection. And the way that we do that is with this command here. So you can see connection, you give it a name. From there, we call upon this library and method, and it's driver manager.getConnection, and then the database URL. Now, in terms of the database URL, that could be a number of different things. So if you are using a certain type of database, you're going to use the corresponding URL that you see here. Now, in our case, we're going to use this one here because we're going to be working with MySQL. So we're going to do JDBC : MySQL : and you can see it looks like a regular URL from that point on. Now, if you are working with a local web server or local instance of MySQL, you will, in this particular spot here for host name, you're going to say localhost, and then the name of the database. Now, for those of us that are working on a remote server, and that might be an easier way for some of us to work, so I'm really going to kind of leave that option up to you. We would actually insert the address for Mercury. And it probably would behoove you, once you get the hang of this, to actually try a couple of different approaches just so you get them under your belt and you're comfortable with them. All right. Now they start to detail these a little bit more, and obviously I'm going to skip over a little bit of this. But you can also take that a little bit further. So in addition to the actual URL, you can also drop in the username and the password right in these spots. So now you guys will have learned from working on Mercury, if you've done PHP or advanced PHP for that matter, and we work with MySQL, that the approach to logging into Mercury is going to be a little bit different from just saying Scott and Tiger for username and password. And you should be familiar with the fact that it's going to be basically your RAC number and your password. And then in terms of accessing the database, any database that you're going to name is also going to be prefaced with your Mercury account name and an underscore and then your database name. So if you've done this stuff in PHP, it's kind of old hat. But if you haven't done that yet, this is one spot where you might get stuck, and I'm hoping to demonstrate that as we actually work with a real example. So we'll get to that point, and hopefully that will make sense for you. All right, so now that we have the connection going, we can actually go ahead and create some statements. And then notice here that in order to, initiate a statement, we actually have to kind of invoke an instance of the whole statement class. So we're going to do that. We're going to create something called statement, and it's going to be basically the output of this method, which is connection.createStatement. And then we're able to have that structure in place to do that work. Once that's in place, so once we've created an instance of statement called statement with a lowercase s, we then can invoke some additional methods that allow us to do some things. So notice that some of the methods that are available, for example, would be execute update, execute query, and notice the format here. So we're actually going to be creating a string, and then we're going to put in our SQL statement. So it'll work very much in this fashion. So you see that if I say statement.execute update, and then I just put in my SQL statements, create table, give the table a name, put in the parameters that you're working with, and then you can do the statement and have the statement execute and do its thing. Now, in order to pull results back from that executed statement, we do need to also create an instance of the result set, which is another class that we have available. So to do that, we'll type in some code like this. We'll say result set, and we create an instance, give it a name, and then we once again will have a statement, and in this case will be execute query. And then notice that within the parens, once again, we have a SQL statement where we are going to, once we have the object created, we can then run a query like we normally would, but this time the query is going to result in some stuff coming back. So when we run a query, it brings back another table of information. You need somewhere for it to go. That spot is the result set. Now, if you want to actually do stuff with the result set, then you have another step you have to take. And that is this next part here. Let's do a little bit of explanation here as to how this works. So keep in mind, once again, that by virtue of generating this query statement, so in other words, we did our update, created the table, we executed a query, and then the result of that query is ending up in this instance of result set. So now you have a table of information that's been generated from the result of the query, and you need to be able to look at what you did. Now, if you were working with a database tool, you can see the output right on the screen in the form of a table. But since we're working with a programming language, that's just in memory, so we don't see it unless we create a way to see it. Now, because database tables can contain rows of information, in order to be able to see all the stuff in the table, we are actually ideally going to write some form of a loop in order to step through and read in each row and then put it up on the screen or do whatever it is that we're going to do with it. In this case, our concern is mostly to put it up on screen. So, or somewhere else. But now he's making a point here, the author that is, that the initial row position is null. So in other words, if you're trying to pull information back from a particular row and your first row is null, that's going to cause a little bit of a problem. So in order to get to that first row, we're going to use the next method as he shows here. And then with each time we're going to step through a row, we're going to do the same thing and pull back the information. So this is actually just the first part of the statement here. So this is a while loop, and if you read the logic here, so while whatever condition is true, and the condition here is that the result set has a next, and by next we mean has a next row. So since we're starting out at the null position, right away we're going to look to see, is there a next row? So you can see the logic here. If it's an empty table, what's going to happen is it's going to come back false. If it's got something in it, it's going to proceed, and then it's going to grab that information, and so it's going to get the result set. It's going to get a string plus a space, a string plus a space, and a string, and then it's going to put it out to the screen. So that would be like the one method to do that. Now, if you are wondering why get string, space, get string, space, get string, and that is because of the way that we set this up. So right here, we created a table, and notice that it says this code executes the SQL query. I'm sorry. All right, so right here, it's indicating that we're creating a particular table, and then we're actually ignoring that because this does not match up with this. All right, so I apologize. That doesn't seem very logical to me that they would have a table creation that's a little bit different than the actual result. But in this result set, they're running the query and they're selecting basically 3 columns. First name, middle initial, and last name from the student table, and then they have some criteria. So when we get to this point, it's going to pull in first name, space, middle initial, space, last name, put it all in one line. And then since the loop is done at that point, it'll go back up and check to see if there is a next in the result set. And if there is, they'll proceed. If not, they won't. And then you're basically done with your output. Now, in order to see this in action, let's go ahead and try to create this. Now, we do need to keep in mind that we are going to be working with MySQL, and we're going to get to this point here, and at this point we are then going to need to jump out and either to our local server or to our remote server. In this case, it'd be either Mercury or Kronos, depending on when you're listening to this video, and connect to your database. So this step here is going to take us on a little bit of a diversion in order to get the database connection working. But I'm going to get all the code pulled up first, and then we'll proceed from there. So let's go ahead. Let's jump over to Eclipse if you don't have it open already. We are going to go ahead and create a new Java project. And let's go ahead and give it a name. I'm just calling it TestDB. Now, I do know that this code is already pre-created, and I'm going to copy from that. But what I'm trying to avoid here is actually pulling in the author's source directly into my project structure because I don't want to alter his source, so if you're wondering. But if you have access to the source files, you can just pull them in directly and just edit the one line that you need. So just please keep that in mind. And then let's go ahead and click Finish. And then inside our new project, we're going to create a new class file. And I'm going to call this TestDB. And then we're going to click Finish. And then it created it. Now here it is up on the screen. Now I'm going to jump into my file folder here and locate the source code for this book. And I'm hoping you're following along with all the clicks I'm going through, but I suppose you guys have the advantage of pressing pause to find it, and your location will certainly be different. Now, this example in the book is called Simple JDBC Java, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open it up with my text editor to copy all this stuff in. Now, I am going to skip copying the package file because we decided to go without that, and let's copy all that code, and then let's come back over to Eclipse. Now I am going to actually just replace, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it here below and then selectively pull up the things we need to. So I'm going to take my import statement, put it up at the top. And one of the reasons I'm doing this is because, you know, first of all, my project is named something different, so I don't want to make that mistake. And then I want to make sure I get all the right things into the right spots. And from what I'm seeing here, I'm just going to go ahead and replace all this stuff above. So inside the main method here, I'm going to be placing this stuff. Now I'm realizing that I just did a bad copy paste, so let me do that one more time. I'm actually going to replace all of this, the main method I originally created as well. All right, so here is the code thrown in. And I'm just going to do a quick scroll through to make sure we have no syntax problems. Now, of course, I have this little code stub here that can go. Not a bad idea to go ahead and save everything at this point. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to condense my space down a little bit, mostly so that things fit on the screen together. And actually, you know, I'm going to Control Z that. Let's leave that stuff on the screen. And I'm just going to try to gain a little screen space this way. All right, notice with the import here that we also are importing the Java SQL libraries. But now remember, we need to pull in our MySQL jar file into this project. Before I do anything, I'm actually going to save this. And, you know, for a number of different reasons. First of all, I don't want to lose my work, but sometimes this will identify the fact that it needs to have those things present. But I'm going to make sure that that jar file is there. So I went to Project Properties, Build Path, Libraries, Add External Jar, come and find your MySQL connector, open it up, click Apply, click OK. Okay, so now that is available to us. Now notice that now it creates an entry here in our structure for the package where the jar file is directly available to us. Now it's interesting because if you were to explore this and go in and see all the different commands, you absolutely can do that. So you can see all the stuff that's available to us if you want to explore. But also never be afraid to go take a look deeper into any of the stuff that you see. In fact, if you went into the system library, you might see that there's certain things in here that you could you know, do. So for example, you know, I might go into something like this, and you can dig pretty deep and get to looking at how stuff is created and how it's put together, and just simply what's present. So never be afraid to explore the stuff that you have available. All right, now that we have all this stuff in there, we have our jar file pulled in. Now we're just going to kind of read through the code here and just very quickly try to identify what's going on. So he does explain these steps both in the book and obviously in the code file here. So this first part is loading the driver. Okay, so you see the driver that's being pulled in, and that is being pulled in from here. And if I were to actually dig in to the jar file and see all the things that are included, I would find com MySQL JDBC driver in here somewhere. All right, so that's important to note. So those things are present within these particular libraries. Now, probably our most challenging part is going to be this connection part. So let's read past that for a second and then take a look at the fact that we're creating an instance of statement, just like we talked about before. We're going to create a result set. And you can see once again that we have this information. And then we also will have this while statement here, which is going to do exactly what we described before. And then notice that they're putting in, instead of spaces in this case, they're putting in tabs to make sure that all the information lines up. Now, another important thing to note here before we try to do this database connection and before we try to run anything is that this is going to try to pull up a result set from a database that already exists. So that is going to just indicate to us that we need to actually have that database available in order for that to happen. So I'm going to pause the video here and make sure I have all my files out there, and then we'll walk through this step by step. All right, and I'm coming to the conclusion right now that maybe this is actually a good spot to stop the video because this is kind of like a separate encapsulation of content. Because in order to work with the student database now, we are going to actually need to backtrack back to page 1180 in the book and do the creation of the database. And there's going to be different approaches here as to whether you're doing this locally in your own machine or if you're going to be working on a remote database, and those are going to have some different issues. All right, so I'm actually going to be ending this video here, and we're going to be moving on back to our book to do some database work, and then we're going to move over to one of our database servers or command line places where we can do some of this stuff. But I just want to let you know that if you're working on a local instance of a web server, so let's say you're running WAMP or XAMPP or MAMP, for example, or the straight MySQL product on your machine, what you'll be able to do then is run these commands directly because you have control. If you don't have those available, what I'm going to demonstrate is working on Mercury, and as I indicated before, Mercury has its own unique quirks, but hopefully we'll get that all to work. This video ends here. Please move on to the next video to do the database work that we need to do and hopefully get everything to run. Now, once those are in place, then you have everything you need to do your homework. And I know some of you are stuck on those particular steps, so we're going to address that in just a moment. See you in the next video.